We are. Thanks, Teresa.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So the core team would like to invite you to our first public outreach meeting for Senate Bill 19, the Stream Gaging Plan. We just kind of have a few sort of ground rules, if you will, for the meeting. If you could please keep your video turned off just to help with bandwidth issues that we may have. Right now, everyone is muted and only our meeting organizer can unmute folks. And so that's just to help from keeping everyone from talking on top of each other. But if you have any questions, you can send those to the email address that's listed below. And it's also on the Stream Gaging website that's housed on the Water Board's website. And just want to let folks know that this meeting is being recorded. So with that, we'll get going. So as I mentioned, Senate Bill 19, we have the core team members, myself, Teresa Connor with Department of Water Resources, Matthew Correa, also with DWR. And then from the Water Board, we have Dan Schultz and Aaron Ragazzini and Valerie Zimmer. And then with DFW, we have Todd Carlin. And then from Department of Conservation and the California Geologic Survey, we have Mike Fuller and also Bill Short. So those are the core team folks, and I believe everyone's on the call today. And then just wanted to go over an overview about things that we're going to be talking about today. I want to give a brief background on why we have this directive from the legislature to take a look at the stream gauge network throughout the state. And we're going to, Senate Bill 19 is the legislature kind of code, and so that's short for what we're doing for here. But so key provisions of the Senate bill, key elements of the implementation, and also key steps and rough time frame that we have to meet. The stream gauge exploration tool, Dan is going to take over the presentation from that perspective on, and then talk about our next steps. And then if we have time at the end and we're able to, we'll try to address some comments and questions. So as far as, why are we doing this? Why do we need more stream gaging in the stream gaging plan? It's the state's responsibility to manage, protect California's water while also protecting, restoring, and enhancing the natural and human environment. An effective stream gauge network is essential to do that. And the TNC, recently did a gauge gap study that identified that almost 3/4 of California's watersheds don't have a state or federally operated stream flow gauge. And the majority of these ungauged watersheds have surface water diversions. As a result, California learned in the recent drought that decommissioning of gauges and lack of gauges in priority watersheds causes a significant data gap that hamper our effective management of water resources, which forces state agencies to spend extra resources on the field or on field investigations, another less accurate means of obtaining the data that we need to forego timely and effective action because the data isn't available. And the stream gaging network is insufficient to address these key management needs such as water supply, flood, public safety, water quality, and ecosystem management. And then just to highlight some of the key provisions of what is in SB 19. And so SB 19 is directing Department of Water Resources and the State Water Resources Control Board to develop a plan to take a look at the stream gauge network and make recommendations on how to improve it. And determination of funding needs, opportunity for modernizing and reactivate our system and potentially reactivating existing gauges or historical gauges and deploying new gauges in priority locations across hydrologic regions in the state. Again, DWR and the State Board are going to work together with Department of Fish and Wildlife and also the Department of Conservation. And we're also jointly working with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, who's on the Technical Advisory Committee, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. And we're also to work with other interested stakeholders, such as all of you. And then just one thing we wanted to highlight and touch upon is that Senate Bill 19 is directing us to develop a plan only. There is no funding at this point to actually install street gauges. But just wanted to make that clarification. Hopefully that will come at a later date, but right now it's just for planning only. And just some other sort of key provisions with SB 19. We have a priority to install gauges where we have lack of data in areas where we have, conflicts in water management, or where water can be more managed more effectively for multiple benefits, such as water supply, water quality, flood, or ecosystem. And some other things that we're asked to consider is, identify opportunities where local agencies can help us either through cost share arrangements, or if they can, install and operate stream gauges as well. I think we recognize that, the state and the federal agencies can't operate all stream gauges in the state, most likely. And then also the ease of integrating the stream gauge into the existing network. It might not make a lot of sense to, have to drive 6 hours from somewhere to, install one stream gauge or to maintain it, but just things of that. Is there a historical gauge for that location? And then also availability of other temperature, or is there water temperature data for that specific location? To the degree of water quality and flow impacts related to cannabis cultivation in the particular basin. And then also we need to integrate the data and meet the demands of the Open and Transparent Water Data Act. And then also, is there an ability to provide some data to assist with groundwater management under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act? And then we'll just shift over to some of the key elements of the implementation plan. So some of them are a little obvious, but we need to develop an implementation schedule, which we'll touch upon here in a couple slides. But we are supposed to be done and submit our plan by June of 2022. So and we started, technically on July 1. So we had 2 years. Develop a technical advisory committee, which we've done, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then also we're going to develop a map of the existing stream gauge network, which will also include the historical gauges, and Dan will touch upon that when he's talking during the presentation. And we've begun that process, and so sort of the things that we're still missing, or things that we need to seek, is, private stream gauge network information, such as ones that, maybe like other like energy, operators have, such as PG&E and Southern Cal Edison, and other private networks that we can include in our map. Right now we only include gauges that we are available for the public to view through various public websites. But we believe we're missing quite a few that are out there. California Natural Resources Agency has also asked if we could include, hydrometeorological stations in this process, which we're trying to figure out if we can. If not, we will do this. We'll take a look at that and incorporate it after we're done looking at the stream gauges, and pick that up in like July of 2022. And then there is a link, or will be a link soon on the SB 19 public website to the existing map that Dan will go over here in a few moments. So some other things, I sort of mentioned a little while ago, we need to, make sure that we are considering multi-benefits and locations when we're going through our prioritization process. And then, as I mentioned before, is there opportunities for cost share agreements, ability to help. These bullets I've sort of talked about already, but these are other things we need to keep into mind when we're going through our ranking criteria, which is sort of our next big step, is to figure out how we are going to prioritize. And these are things that we will keep in mind. And then, just the overall cost as well. How much will it cost to install, operate, and maintain that gauge? Or do we have landowner issues, whether it's on private land or public land, or is it in a remote area? Are there public safety concerns? And other things may come to mind, but these are things that we're keeping in mind when we're going to start our process about developing the ranking criteria. We also are working on stakeholder outreach. So in Senate Bill 19, it does direct us to coordinate with interested stakeholders. So our outreach plan is, this is our first kind of kickoff meeting to get the word out. We're also using the technical advisory committee so that they can reach out to their network and folks and just ask everyone can help out and get the word out so we can make sure people, can get the updates, and they can seek input, or we can seek input from the stakeholders. So that's sort of the goal, is to provide everyone with updates, be as clear and transparent as we can be, and give the opportunity and set expectations. So while folks may provide input that they want to stream Gage, on this stream right here, we may or may not be able to incorporate that, but we want to at least, give everyone the opportunity to provide those recommendations so we can, put them through the analysis process. And then another key step is identifying the data gaps. So we currently are trying to work through a method how we're going to do that. We're working with other entities to determine that are on the TAC, and also from universities. And so hopefully we're planning to do this spring. And we also need to identify what's needed in the various basins, and whether it's water quality needs, if there's a large cannabis diversions that are growing that are going on in that way, if there's groundwater issues, public safety or flooding issues, just try to identify what's going on in various basins and take that into account. And then we have to prioritize these data gaps, because if we decide or determine that, oh, we need 2,000 more stream gauges, it isn't very feasible that we could put all of those in right away. So Senate Bill 19 does ask us to prioritize that list of gaps. Again, probably ones that are helping with multi-benefits would get a higher ranking, but we haven't quite gotten that far yet, but those are sort of our next steps. We also are being asked to identify how much more money would we need, and what are some potential funding sources to install the additional gauges. We're assuming that there's going to be some additional stream gauges that's going to be needed. And again, identify, well, who could operate those stream gauges. And then the other thing that's in the Senate Bill 19 language is that asking us to take a look, is there ways that we can modernize the network and make it a little more efficient and maybe cost savings? And again, just are there opportunities for reactivation? If there's a stream gauge that was on Smith Creek and it was there up till 10 years ago, but yet the structure is still there, that might be a good one to reactivate if we need it, and it'd be a little lower cost because it wouldn't have such a high installation cost. So again, just taking those things into account. Then on the key steps and time frames, so here's a rough schedule. I touched on it a little bit. So right now we are planning to seek input on the stream gauge network, the existing network. We're kicking that off hopefully today. And we're entering 2021. We're hoping to have our ranking criteria set by the spring of 2021. And then have our analysis of the existing network completed by the summer. And then we are hoping to provide our technical advisory committee a draft plan report in the winter of 2022. So sometime this November or December, before the end of calendar, winter 2022. So before next January. And then we would be releasing a draft report plan for public comment in the spring of 2022. And then finalizing our plan in the late spring. And then again, we have to submit by June 30th of 2022. So clock is ticking. And then just wanted to touch upon sort of roles and responsibilities of the two groups that we have. We have a core team, which I mentioned, and I'll show you again who those folks are, but we are the decision-making body, and we're responsible, it's DWR and the state board are responsible for developing the plan, and we're doing so in coordination with Department of Fish and Wildlife and also Department of Conservation. And then we have a technical advisory committee team that we've formed, and their sort of role is to provide technical input to the core team, and then also coordinate and outreach with our partners, and then review our documents and sort of tools and processes that we're planning to use. So they're the advisory body to the core team. Remind folks, so this is the core team that we have set up through. And then for the technical advisory committee team, we have 10 members from a wide spectrum of water group interests to advise the core team throughout our planning effort. We tried to get representatives from the sort of different spectrums, being public safety, environmental, water quality, agricultural, academia, and data management interests. So we think we have a pretty well-rounded group of folks. You'll see their names there, and they're also on the website. So, if you would rather ask them questions or work with them versus the core team, we do have those two bodies, and you're welcome to contact those folks and leave their emails or on the SB19 website. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Teresa. So yes, I'm Dan Schultz with the State Water Board, and I'm going to cover some information on our stream gauge exploration tool that is under development, and then next steps. So kind of a little background of what we have put together so far. We currently have a snapshot of Gage sites and information from the California Data Exchange Center and the National Water Information System that we collected in fall of last year. And as Teresa mentioned, we still have some data needs. We're looking to update some of this information with additional stream gauge information, those that are operated by local governments, such as cities and counties, and then also the private industry. Next slide. So this slide kind of provides a bit of an overview of what we're feeding into our exploration tool. As I mentioned, the locations primarily for the Gage data sets that we have right now are being fed from the California Data Exchange Center and National Water Information System. And then we're also pulling a lot of data from different sources as well to help build out what we consider the attribute table, or the information that can be provided and made available for the different gauges, which we'll go over in a minute. And these come from both the two main sources with CDEC and NWIS, as well as some additional information that we're working on developing and adding things such as Gage funding and priority purpose of Gage. We're adding stream stats and drainage area information. And then also there's some additional assessment that the core team and the technical advisory committee are doing. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the type of information that we can display when people go and visit the mapping tool. And if you click on a gauge, this is right now how we have it set up, the information for each gauge that will come up. The site ID and the operator, we're adding in site name as well to help people know what kind of do the crosswalk between our mapping source and our mapping tool and the data source. And we have a number of additional items that we're keeping track of, whether or not it's an active or inactive gauge, the period of record that the gauge has. So for the inactive gauges, it will have the period of record that it was active for, whether or not it collects other water quality or temperature information, drainage area. And then we're also, for all the gauges that we have, a web link to, we're providing that as well. So you can click on the link and go directly to the Gage site itself. Next slide. So the other item that we're working on with this exploration tool is basically what we're calling filters. And this is really how I see folks exploring the data that's in there. So some of the things that you can toggle on and off are, seeing which gauges in the state are actively reporting stream flow, which ones are actively reporting water level stage or temperature or water chemistry. So you can see where they are by locations, and then you can also, as before, click on them and get the additional information for each of those for that individual gauge that you might be interested in. And then this one also shows what you see here is the inactive stream gauges toggled on. So you can go back and forth between just seeing the active stream gauges or the inactive, or you can look at all gauges. And when you play, and there'll be some instructions that go with this, but when you click one of these on, they're whichever one matches all. So if you have gauges reporting stream flow clicked on and water level, and temperature, it will only show the gauges that meet all three of the criteria that you have clicked on. Next slide, please. So kind of next steps with the exploration tool. So as I mentioned, it's still under development. We're hoping to have it up and ready to go for this presentation, but we still have just a couple more kinks to work out on it. So we're hoping that it will be live next week. And the link will be posted on our Stream Gaging Plan website, which we'll provide the link a little later on in the presentation. And then also just wanted to let everybody know that one of the main purposes of this exploration tool is for you, the public, to explore the Gage data and Gage information that we start to pull together. So we are looking for public input on how to improve this tool based on what additional features or data that you think would be helpful for you to explore this information. And that might be, might be more mapping layers that we're providing. We have some kind of stock ones that will be built in there, which is your base layers, your stream layers, your other water layers and watershed layers, those types of information. But there's additional ones that you think would be useful to help explore the data. We can add those, as well as additional filters, which was ways to explore the data and kind of see what different gauges meet different criteria. And as we develop more information that we'll be discussing in the next few slides, we'll also be updating this mapping tool as we go. Next slide, please. So, and I should mention as we update the mapping tool, we're going to be adding there'll be a note on there that will say when the tool was last updated. So you'll know whether there's new information from the last time you visited. So moving on to next steps, three main next steps. One is to identify the local and private gauge information, conduct the gauge gap analysis, and develop ranking criteria and prioritization. Next slide, please. So for the local and private gauge information, I kind of wanted, this is something that we're still looking to identify additional sources of information. And it's important where we can get that information. So the core team and our agency have some expertise and knowledge of where gauges might be located in the local or private arena, and can get access to some of those. However, as Teresa covered earlier, we are under time and resource constraints to collect that information. And so that was one of the reasons that we're really leaning on the technical advisory committee to help inform where additional gauges might be located that we can track down and either incorporate into the online tool and our analysis. But if the entity wants to stay private, then then at least we'll know where those gauges are. And then also public stakeholders, reaching out to you all as part of this outreach event, and just through ongoing coordination and outreach of where those additional gauges might be located and whether or not they are hosted on a website or not. Next slide, please. So the next step, one of the next steps also is to do the gauge gap analysis, and Teresa touched on this earlier. So our next steps for this effort is to evaluate existing protocols and other efforts that have been done to identify stream gauge network gaps. And this is really looking at how well an existing or new gauge would represent the drainage area, either upstream or downstream of that gauge. There's a few different approaches to this that we're aware of that look at percent of drainage area as cutoffs for how much change in drainage area or change in flow the gauge can represent, either upstream or downstream. And then the other part associated with this is determining the scale of analysis. And the easiest way to think of this is whether you do the analysis at a stream reach scale or a watershed scale. We need to have some sort of a size cutoff because it would be too difficult to try to do an analysis of every small sub watershed and whether that is well gauged. So we have to evaluate and determine what scale we'll be doing the analysis at. And then the last step will be, once we determine the first two steps, is to develop a standard process or tool to identify the stream gauge network data gaps, which will feed into later on in the process. Next slide, please. So for the next step will be to do the stream gauge ranking criterion prioritization. And this is really looking at placing or modernizing and reactivating stream gauges where we have these conflicts in water management. And we went over the different management scenarios of water supply, flood, water quality, and ecosystem management. Next slide, please. So for this effort, the first step is to identify information to help prioritize the gauge locations for different management needs. And the information that will help feed this is the gauge gap analysis that we already covered, and then also ranking criteria. So the thought here is what type of information will help us to develop ranking criteria so that we can start to go into the prioritization for the different gauges. So this might be information that is like geospatial information. Right now seems to be the most readily available information we could use. This would be information about like water use in watersheds, or flood risk zones, threatened and endangered species habitat, that type of information that we can use for each of the different management needs to kind of look at, where is it most important to put in a gauge when we're looking at the whole state. And so once we have that information collected of what we're going to use to inform the prioritization process, then the next step would be to develop kind of a standard process to analyze for those data gaps where we want to prioritize gauge locations for the different management needs. And right now, the way that we're looking at approaching it is, of those 4 management needs, kind of looking at each one separately to start with and developing prioritizations for each one separately. And then at the end, for the final gauge prioritization, it will really be identifying those locations that meet multiple management needs, or ones that are for potentially for the different individual managements are of high need or high concern. Next slide, please. So how to stay up to date. The easiest way to stay up to date is by signing up for our email list subscription. This is our primary means of communicating with you all. So if you go to our website, which is listed down here at the bottom, at the Stream Gaging Plan website, in the top right, you'll see a blue box that says subscribe directly to the Stream Gaging Plan email list. If you click on that and enter your email information, you will be signed up for our subscription list. Next, and on here also, I almost missed it, you can also email us directly at streamgagingplan@waterboards.ca.gov. That's our primary email box for the core team. Next slide, please. And how to provide input. You can email us, as mentioned, at our email address. You can work through one of your TAC representatives, or and then of course continue to attend future outreach meetings. Next slide. Okay, so that's pretty much our presentation for the day, and want to turn it over to questions and comments. We are kind of changing some things on the fly here. We were going to use our Zoom chat feature to do comments, but we don't have a chat feature with this Zoom setup. So I think the thought was we would do a raise your hand if you have a question, and we will unmute you to ask your question, or if you would rather, you can email our email inbox that's listed on here, and we will check that inbox as we go and address any questions that come in. Did any of the other core team have anything to add before we go to questions? Okay, Valerie, do you want to, or yeah, I think Valerie, you were going to do the calling on people.
Yes, and I do see a couple of hands raised. I see Bill Laverne, and I'm going to try to figure out how to unmute. Unmute. You're unmuted. Go for it.
The first name is Laverne.
Oh, Laverne Bill, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So my name is Laverne Bill. I'm the Cultural Resource Manager for the Yochadihi Wintu Nation, and I appreciate you inviting me this. Thank you very much. My question is how do we get more tribes involved, and how do you get a tribal representative on this board to give feedback from a tribal perspective?
For tribal involvement, you know, we'd be happy to present at any tribal meetings that that are in the future, for one. And then that is probably a good idea to get a tribal representative on the on our technical advisory committee. So we'll circle back on that. If you want to send us an email with that as a reminder, so we have your contact information, we can reach out to you after the meeting.
Okay, awesome. No, I appreciate that. And then what I can do is I will send you a couple points of contact for the various tribal folks within this footprint. So if you could add them also, and they can participate as they need to. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we would be looking for from the tribes as a whole, and this is, you know, it might be easier just to set up a separate working group with them, would be a representative to participate on the TAC on behalf of the tribes.
Yeah, and this is Teresa with DWR. I just wanted to, you know, sort of add that at least from trying to figure out how to, maybe I'm over here now, turn my camera back on, but you know, so for DWR, we have our tribal advisory person, Anacita Aguilar. And so I had forwarded her the, you know, meeting flyer for this meeting to try to help spread the word. I just wanted to, but yeah, I agree with Dan. A more focused outreach effort is probably needed there.
Okay, I see a hand up from Carl Ronning, and I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, I'm Carl Ronning. I'm a hydrologist with the South Yuba River Citizens League. So I manage around 20 gauges in the Yuba River watershed, but all of them do not have, like, you know, any type of like solar powered wireless transmitters or anything for being able to look at the data live online. And I guess I was just wondering you know, are those gauges, I basically go out and download the data twice a year. And would gauges like those be, you know, are you looking for things like that? Are those essential, or, you know, is there a benefit to try to work with you guys to share that stuff?
Yes, I think there is a benefit. What we're focused on are kind of the longer term, more permanent type gauges versus the seasonal, and it's not, or, you know, versus more of a seasonal gauge that folks are putting in for a couple of years for a specific project and then taking out. And it sounds like the gauges you're speaking of are more of the permanent monitoring type variety. It would be very helpful for us to, at a minimum, know the locations of those gauges and the period of record of those gauges. You know, one of the components of the plan is to identify, you know, of the existing gauge network, one of the outcomes could be to identify some of these gauge locations that maybe we would like to focus in on helping to bring that information to make it more live up into the CDEC environment or other environments to share publicly.
Okay, great. I see a hand up from Scott Harding, and then I'm going to start going to emails. I think you're unmuted now, Scott.
I am, thank you. Yeah, I'm Scott Harding. I'm with American Whitewater. We're a nationwide nonprofit river conservation organization and recognize a lot of benefits in having gages on our streams and rivers. In addition to the ones that related to water quality, resource management, other things like that, is that they're used by river and stream enthusiasts in many different ways, recreation being one of them. And I applaud your approach on having maps and the mapping tool. That'll be very helpful going through this process for everybody involved, and really essential with something that's so geographically widespread and numerous in quantity. My question is, are you going to be able to provide that information as well in GIS data format in addition to your mapping tool so that others can cross-reference and analyze that data set with other data?
Yes, that is something. So right now we have a couple different projects we're working on, but right now it's really, we've just pulled the data across from the main sites. It's a static layer. It's not a live layer, but you know, it is just that. It's just a layer of information, and that would be, we'd be fine sharing that with other people.
Great.
One of the things. Go ahead.
Should I email to find out how, or is this something you may post on the website for this later?
Yeah, go ahead and send us an email if you're interested in that information. One of the things that we would like feedback on is how you would use that information to see how it would fold into our effort as well, because you might be looking at it in a way that would be beneficial for us to consider also. Yeah,
absolutely, and that's the purpose in asking. Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
And Dan, I think right now the plan on the mapping tool isn't to have like a download GIS information, right? But we would share it when folks ask for it. Is that, or are you thinking later on we might have a download data button?
Yeah, the current version doesn't have that, won't have that capacity or capability. And I think that to build that in, it's a little bit of some extra steps. I just need to check with our IT department and stuff about the metadata and everything else that would be coming with it.
Okay, I'm going to the emails. I have one request for signing up for the update list. I will respond. We have a Lyris list that can be, I think you can see the page linked on the paper. If you, those of you who are on the phone probably can't see this, but there is a web page on this slide, and if you go there, you can sign up for an email list. And I will also send anybody that sends an email to the core team. We'll respond with a direct link to that email list to make it easy for you. Do you want to add anything else, Dan or Teresa, to that?
No, thank you.
Okay. Okay, the next question. I'm interested in knowing if the team is planning to look at Gages in the Eastern Sierra. I'm also interested to know if tribes are going to be able to assist in managing gauge stations.
So I would say yes to both of them. I believe we're looking at the whole entire state, and as we mentioned earlier, we are looking for opportunities where we can, sort of cooperate with other operators and other, potential funding entities, which would include, tribal governments as well.
Okay. The next question I have here is, establishing a stream gauge is a challenge, but maybe the easy part. I didn't hear any mention of the challenges associated with streamflow measurements needed to develop and maintain stage discharge relationship. In other words, rating curves.
Yeah, and so that is it comes up a couple times, I think, in our discussions. Well, more than a couple, but a couple different focus areas. But, one is we do have to identify the funding needs, not only to install a gauge, which is a one-time, mostly a one-time, kind of here's your, X amount of dollars to install this gauge, but then we have this annual O&M cost to, operate that stream gauge, for the life of the stream gauge. We hate to spend all this money to put stream gauges in and then have to, have them sit idle because we don't have any money to operate them 3 or 5 years later. And then we have had discussions about, including sort of stream gauge standards, operations, which, you know, the USGS has quite a bit of information available, and including that in our report and having some sort of, you know, kind of baseline of what it is, you know, at minimum would meet, you know, sort of our quality control assurance kind of guidelines before we would want to release that information or make it available to the public, or at least we would need to, you know, kind of clarify, you know, to what level is this information, you know, collected and certified. Hopefully that answered the question, but.
Yeah, that folds nicely into the next question was, do you plan to incorporate data quality assurance or quality control standards for gauges that are included in the network?
I believe last discussion, and we are going to include a discussion in the report that we provide. How detailed it is, I don't think we've gotten that far yet, but we are planning to talk about it or address it.
Okay, next question is also related. Will you generate a public bid for purchasing stream monitoring stations?
Will we generate a bid to like acquire them?
I think so.
Okay.
I
think that will depend on who is going to operate and you know, sort of pay for those gauges. If it's, you know, a local entity or, you know, tribal government has been brought up, you know, I don't foresee a large state, you know, bid to install X amount of stream gauges per year, but I think that's a little early to say. I think we need to wait and see how many gauges we need, who can operate them, you know, where the funding is going to come from. But right now I don't foresee a large state bid, but it could be a possibility.
Okay. The next question is, thank you for the meeting today. Does the online tool provide a record of the equipment type currently in use for each gauge, if known? And will the gauge gap analysis and or prioritization analysis consider the accuracy of historical data available from each gauge, whether known or inferred? So I guess that's two questions. The first one is about what type of equipment is in use, and the other is historical accuracy or accuracy of historical gauges.
So for the first question, at this point, we weren't tracking down. I don't think that was something, I'll have to look back and see if it's something that we were able to automatically pull the actual type of installed equipment doing the measurement. We were going to discuss we've talked about in the plan to discuss different types of equipment to measure gauges, and including newer technologies coming out as well. So, you know, I think that's something where if there's value and a need to have that information, then we have it. We're more than happy to share it. Or if you have a recommendation on the importance of collecting that information, that would be good to know too, as well. And you can send us an email on how you would see using that information moving forward. For the reliability of the data, it's a little bit harder to track down. You know, some gauge sites we know we can pull up and view what their operation and maintenance schedule is, and others it's a little, there's not that much information to support that. So we won't be going through all of the historic gauge data and doing an analysis of the quality of that data. I think really that's going to be more at the user end, as far as when you use the data to do an application, to double check the O&M of historic data. Moving forward, as Teresa mentioned, we do plan to, as part of the report, provide some guidelines or some recommendations on data quality management.
Okay, the next question is, how will the value of past and present seasonal low flow gauges be considered in the prioritization process?
So I'll take a stab at this one, Dan, and you can add in. I think it will come into consideration, but it, you know, as it relates to what's going on in that basin. You know, so if you have a seasonal gauge in an area that's in a high, you know, risk for flooding, you know, that would probably be important to have, or, you know, vice versa, if you're someone there that, you know, is, you know, really has a big water demand in the summer months, and that's the only time we need it in. Yeah, I think we could consider it. Probably the best case, we would like a gauge in all year round, but we also realize that some conditions don't allow for low flow and high flow measurements just due to the stream flow condition or the stream conditions. But it's sort of my first thought, Dan. I don't know if you have anything to add to that one.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we're really looking for as part of the analysis of existing gauges are more the ones that are what would be considered more permanent. They've been in the same location for a period of time. I know there's a lot of gauges that have been put in different locations to monitor for a couple of years associated with the direct project. Those, part of that effort would be if one of those watershed areas came up as a high priority when it was time to move forward. That's really where looking at that gauge location might be, you know, the perfect site to install the gauge. Our plan won't really go into where to put the gauge in specifically. We'll just kind of identify more broad locations due to, you know, local site conditions and public access and stuff like that.
Okay, we have a question in the chat by Adam Hutchinson.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Adam Hutchinson. I'm with the Orange County Water District. This is a very great effort. I really applaud the state for taking this on. I just had a couple of comments. I did want to follow up on the quality of the gauging data tool, and that maybe the USGS ratings of the data could be put on the tool so you can kind of get a sense of are they good ratings or poor ratings based on the USGS published data. And then finally, I'm glad you're looking at new technologies. We're looking at actually non-invasive camera technology to evaluate stream flows. So there might be real opportunities to not only get better, more reliable data, but reduce cost versus the traditional, more invasive method that have been used for the past 100+ years. So thank you.
And Dan, I think on the attribute table, or maybe it's, yeah, maybe I thought we had a, you know, data certified sort of a yes, no, but not the rating. Is that?
It'll say whether it measures flow.
Okay.
But one of the challenges with the operation and maintenance and the quality of the data is, you know, we'd have to go into each gauge and do an evaluation of that information by gauge. And I don't know if we have the time and resources to do that across the number of gauges that we have, both active and inactive. But we'll look back at, you know, I took a note down of that and a couple other things. We'll look back at the kind of broader suite of information that we were able to pull across and see what types of information we have that might help to get at some of that. And worst case scenario, you know, we do have the link straight to the gauge. And if there's interest in a particular gauge or a couple gauges, you could go to that gauge site directly and it should be there.
Okay, another question about technology. Are the use of real-time data collection via USGS super gauge technology currently being used by Midwestern states being considered? So and there's a link to this USGS super gauge technology.
Yeah, and so I think we haven't gotten delved into that arena yet, but certainly, yeah, anything that's out there, especially if it's, you know, being used by the USGS is something that we will consider. I know that other things that have been proposed is there's, you know, new technology as it relates to using drones to fly over and you know, somehow they're measuring flow as well. So yeah, I think at this point, anything that's been established or, you know, has a good recommendations, especially from the USGS or other stream gauge operators, it's something we would consider as we move forward.
Okay, the next question. Could you comment on whether the plan will consider upgrades to existing gauges to meet water management and data needs?
Again, I would say yes on that one as well. I think part of the benefit is reaching out, doing our outreach is if folks could let us know where they think that where improvements should be made to existing stream gauges. That would, be beneficial for the core team to know, because we can't know everything about every gauge, and as Dan mentioned, we're going to be limited. So if folks could, let us know where that is, we could certainly take that into consideration as we're moving forward.
Okay, next question are, the groundwater sustainability agencies are planning to monitor river and canal diversion sites. These monitoring sites will need to totalize the flow of diverted water. Are you coordinating with any GSAs to design a single monitoring station that can be used for multiple types of locations and uses?
We have not done that as a part of this analysis. It's a good recommendation. So yeah, we can take that into consideration as we move forward.
Okay, I have several, please add me to your list, and I'm happy to contribute comments, which is great. I will respond to those. The next question I have is, when is public input and comment, when are they due? Does the Technical Advisory Committee include any federal land management agencies like National Park Service, BLM, U.S. Forest Service? BLM is Bureau of Land Management, of course.
So I'll answer the second half of that question. So right now we have a sort of a list of, folks that we would like to reach out to, one, in addition to, tribal entities, and several of the federal landowners are on that list. So we are hoping to do, a more targeted outreach effort. We haven't done that yet, but certainly it's on our to-do list. And I've forgotten the first part of that question.
When is the public input and comments? When are they due?
That's well, we would like to have as much comments and thoughts on, things that we should consider, between now and the summer, to help us with our, development of the gaps and sort of our prioritization. Once we enter into the sort of like the formal public comment period, I'm assuming that's tied to when the report gets released, which would be next spring. And so we don't really have a hard date on the actual final report. But again, our outreach effort is to try to get as much comment and recommendations while we're doing our actual analysis, instead of, towards the end of the analysis. So I don't know, Dan, if you have something better to offer there, but.
Yeah, well, I would just add that, the way we tried to set this up because it is very broad and different stakeholder interests, was through the establishment of the TAC and the backgrounds of the TAC to help represent both the different management groups, but also kind of the broad suite of different potential stakeholders of interest. So you can always any time period coordinate with the TAC, and the hope is that the TAC members kind of have their own outreach efforts kind of established. So it's kind of I can't remember the fancy term, but so we have kind of the core team and the TAC, and it's like bigger concentric rings that kind of go out for each component. So that's kind of how it's set up to disseminate information both downward and upward. So for some of the stuff like Teresa mentioned presented today, if you have comments, thoughts, just send us an email, or again, coordinate with the TAC and maybe start to work to set up some subgroup meetings with your interested partners to start to work through it and provide recommendations up through that as well.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat or the email. Are there any additional questions?
And this is Todd Carlin from Fish and Wildlife. Excuse me. To follow up on that last point or the last question, I'd say in the next month or two would probably be the best time as we're considering different approaches to prioritize gauges in different data sets. There was one question about or suggestion about incorporating some of the GSAs and looking at those flow data for the canals and stuff. So those types of considerations or things that may be important for us to consider for those four identified management benefit categories. The next couple of months as we kind of work through thinking about available data sets and how to prioritize those, I think that would be the best time to submit those types of feedback and comments.
And thanks, Todd. You reminded me, I should have pointed out on that GSA question was, just to point out that internally within DWR, we have a coordination team that includes folks from many of our divisions. And one of the divisions that's on that core team is from our Sustainable Groundwater Management Office. And so, we are coordinating internally with internal DWR, sort of Sigma related staff, but yeah, not to say we couldn't expand that out in some way, but just wanted to add that.
Okay, there's a few more questions in the chat. I see Leonard Ash. I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you. Leonard Ash from Alameda County Water District. I want to echo what Adam said. Much appreciated for the opportunity to provide some input and to get more information about your efforts. And so thank you for providing the forum today. And just a question, in looking at the stream gauge ranking criteria and the prioritization, you listed the 4 aspects of water management benefit categorizations. Can you describe how you'll take into consideration climate change, especially as it relates to changing weather patterns and sea level rise, how that'd be incorporated into your evaluations?
Yeah, so one component with climate change, we are looking at some projections of how climate change is going to impact the state as far as the projected maps and changes that way, because the general thought is that with climate change, we're going to see more conflict in water management. And so that might raise some of those locations that will see larger variance in water supply become more of a critical issue. So that is something that we're generally going to be looking at in our criteria. If we can kind of tease out some of if it kind of turns out that there's hotspots, so to speak, where we see potential bigger impacts in different locations. Or the sea level rise, I hadn't really been looking at that, and we can take a look and see what those projections look like, if we can find any information, or if you have any information that you can share with us about any projected maps or anything about what that might look like, and kind of what those impacts might be of what we want to start gauging. We'd be happy to take those, hoping folks can come up with and help share with us.
Okay, I see a question from the email. If our gauges are already posted in real time on the CDEC website, are you looking for additional information on these specific gauges? Are you looking for a dedicated data feed to your Explorer tool, or is a continued CDEC feeds enough? And then the comment is, CDEC is mostly real-time data with final data being housed on other sites, just as the USDS. So which data source are you prioritizing? So I think the questions are we looking for more information on gauges that are on CDEC? And are we looking for a feed to our tool? And if these gauges are on multiple sites, how are we prioritizing those sites?
So,
yeah. I was just going to say for the tool side of things, it's just a static map. We're not trying to stream the information and pull the information over at this time. One of the potential recommendations that we're looking at in the future is figuring out a platform that does bring all that information to one place for people to be able to view and analyze. At this time, we were able to pull all the background information in CDEC and USGS that's currently in the system. So not necessarily looking for more information right now, but it may be something that we do kind of a broader outreach depending on more information that we might need. And then, and I'll let Teresa in a second expand on that if you'd like. And then the last part being what we did for the CDEC and USGS gauges is we're just pulling one gauge location. We don't prioritize USGS over CDEC in the mapping tool. We just represent it as one gauge that represents that site.
And I was just going to add a couple of things. One, if you don't see your gauge listed on the map, we do want to know that in case for some reason it got missed. And then I think the other thing that we're trying to obtain data on is kind of what is the primary purpose for that gauge, whether, what kind of the for water management, kind of metrics does it meet, whether it's public safety or water supply ecosystem or groundwater, the fourth one. So if you could send that information, that would be helpful. Or if yours is missing.
Okay, I see a hand up from Sophie Carrillo-Mandel.
Hi, my name is Sophie. I'm a facilitator for the Blue Ribbon Committee for the Rehabilitation of Clear Lake, which was formed by AB 707. And in 2019, the committee's technical subcommittee developed a comprehensive monitoring plan for streams in the Clear Lake Basin and also for in-lake monitoring for the lake itself. And the committee expected the monitoring plan to be funded in 2020, but because of the COVID, funding issues, that didn't happen. And the plan wasn't funded by the legislature. And this technical subcommittee includes USGS, the UC Davis Tahoe Environmental Research Center, US EPA, Lake County, local tribes, and the Cyanobacteria Task Force there. I was wondering if, and some of my questions might be a little bit premature at this point, but is there a way for your group to incorporate that monitoring plan into the information that you're taking in? And then the premature questions are, do you have any idea of what kind of funding your group might be looking at, what sources, and how that might be distributed? And then also Lake County is considered by DWR to be a severely disadvantaged community, and are potential benefits to regional socioeconomics part of the considerations for ranking gauges? So three questions. One, is there a way for you to, or are you interested in incorporating the monitoring plan into your work or looking at that? The question about funding, and then also the question about potential potential regional socioeconomic benefits.
I can try there unless you want to add in, Dan, or I can maybe take one or two of them. But so the first one, I guess my first sort of response would be, I don't think that we're going to take individual monitoring plans and include those in with our recommendation. With that being said, if you have identified stream gauging locations that you think are needed, we would like to hear that, and that would be included, in our sort of review when we go through that, that it has been identified that other folks need some stream gauges there. But and then the other part about funding, we haven't delved in it too much, but that is part of our requirement to identify potential new funding sources. One being, sort of, I guess more obvious, at least to myself, it would be, general fund, or perhaps, SGMA related funding, or, flood management related funding, but we haven't really delved into that one just yet. And then the third one was, remind me of the third one?
It's about disadvantaged communities.
Oh, yes. And yes, that is, we have mentioned that should be part of our consideration is, yeah, disadvantaged communities and what benefits, could be added there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add with the monitoring plan, one of the things that we'd be really interested in is the criteria or how you went about locating, identifying those sites to put in those gauges. I think that has a lot of overlap. At this point, I think the way that we're looking to approach the effort is kind of looking broadly at setting up a kind of a standard approach to identify or to prioritize different areas, versus looking at individual, kind of more the opposite end of looking at individual recommendations from stakeholders of this site, that site, that site, that site, simply because the goal is to have a standard approach applied throughout the state. But that being said, one of the key things, and especially for something like this, or for other stakeholders that know of high priority areas in their localized area, is that when we do come out with our criteria and kind of our prioritization, is that feedback loop of is the area of your interest being represented properly by the tools in our ranking system that we came up with. So that's kind of the interactive feedback loop. We're trying to take any, and when I say having kind of a standard approach, is trying to take out bias, basically, individual bias.
Okay, I see a question in the chat from Waterboy. I think you're still muted. I'm having a hard time oh, there you go.
Hi, this is Ken from the Valley Water District. And I guess we've been putting these new gauges in since the early 2000s, working with our local equipment nomad, Gary Baker. And what we find is it's easy to put the gauge in, but the permitting process is not very clear. And I was wondering, if you want them in fast, you could call them not a project underneath CEQA and don't make us file stream bed alteration documents. So I was wondering what your take was on the permitting, which really slows down the whole process.
Yeah, I don't think it was, or it is yet on how to streamline the permitting process. Just sort of my first thoughts would be, the entity that would be installing the stream gauge would have to address that. But certainly, I mean, with DWR, we install stream gauges, and certainly some are more difficult than others to, install. Not only do you have to get a stream bed alteration permit, but if you're going to install near, or on a Caltrans bridge, you got to get encroachment permits and you get landowner permits. And so there is, but it's all site specific. So, but we haven't really discussed how to address that in this effort, but yeah, I don't have much more to offer than that.
Okay, I've got a question about, I'm gonna try to summarize this properly. A gauge, this person knows about a gauge that was originally calibrated to measure flows during the irrigation season, which is the winter. It was not intended to measure the high flows that usually occur in the fall and winter, but it was originally calibrated October through April. The gauge is calibrated up to about 400 CFS, but the flows are higher, and they're guessing that there's probably a lot of gauges that are like this. That would be a good data point to consider. Is the gauge set up to measure flows at a wide range of levels, including typical low flow for the stream and flows up to the expected 100-year flood level? In the case of that particular gauge, it would be possible to take a few velocity measurements during the high and winter flows and use that data to extend the discharge table. So thoughts on gauges that maybe don't cover the full range of flows, and how might that be addressed?
Yeah, so that is site specific as well. And so again, I think with some of our DBR gauges, we recognize that, and so some of our flows are only for low flow, only for high flow, because it is difficult to develop a reliable rating curve. And a lot of that, is dependent on stream conditions, and, the stream where the gauge is just not be in a good location, because the sort of control for the stream that's, controlling how much water is in this, or how much flow is allowed, moves when the flow in the river changes. And so and some of it may be that, so that's one aspect. Is it in a good location to measure a wide range of flows? The second part of that is who's funding that. If it's an entity that's, only related to high flows and they only want to pay you to go out and rate it for high flows, and then you would need the funding to go out and do the work that it would take to, come up with a low flow rating table. So where possible, yes, we would like to have a gauge that's going to be, operate throughout that whole flow condition, but it isn't always attainable. One, again, because of site conditions, and then two, might be because of funding issues.
Yeah, and I think some of that overlap will come out when we do the ranking criteria component, because it won't be, the ranking criteria, the way we're thinking about it right now, will just be statewide, regardless of whether there's a gauge there or not. And then you can see where a gauge is representing, different priority uses or management uses. So say for this example that was provided, that it was in a high flood risk area and would be important to identify floods for downstream people, then that might be a recommendation as part of the outcome, that we would potentially prioritize that to review that site, like Teresa was saying, for its capability to expand that rating table or to identify a new location nearby.
Okay, is there a form to fill out to let you know where we have existing gauges, or just by email? If there isn't a form, it seems a standard form for us to fill out might be useful for you to sort through the sites everyone sends you. The form could have fields to explain the equipment and location, equipment being used, and historic gauging at the site.
I think that's a great idea. We'll, I'll have staff look into that.
Okay. I actually don't see any more questions or hands raised. Okay, I'm still not seeing any. Should we wrap it up?
Gauging the lack of questions and responses, maybe we should maybe try to close out, or what are you thinking, Dan?
Yeah, I think we'll do one last call here for any questions or comments. Raise your hand if you're submitting one way or the other, whether you're emailing us or have anything else to add. And I am seeing none. So we want to thank everybody for participating today. We really appreciate it. And please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to our email or engage your TAC members, which, please go visit our website, and you can see the list of TAC members, more background information on the effort, and we'll continue to update that site as well as we get more information. And hopefully around next week, we'll have the mapping Gage exploration tool up, and you can start to explore that and provide us some feedback on what you'd like to see there as well.
I do have one last quick question. Wondering if there are opportunities for collaboration or develop of alternative gauging opportunities, and specifically thinking about the upper portion of a watershed. I think this is recognizing that the needs of the lower and the upper portion might be different in a watershed.
I think that's kind of a local watershed, evaluation. But when I talked about scale, I think that's kind of where that starts to come in, and whether or not how representative that gauge is of the upper watershed. But let's just say trying to think of two different ones. The gauge in the lower watershed is mainly focused on water use, but in the upper watershed, there's concerns with threatened and endangered rearing habitat. That would be a component where we'd be evaluating whether or not those needs are represented. But again, we will end up with a scale constraint. If we were to look at even just the HUC 10 scale, there's thousands of hydrologic unit code watershed size HUC 10s out there. So it'll just kind of depend on what that'll look like from the scale standpoint.
Can I just add a quick comment to that?
Everybody for, go ahead, sorry Val.
Oh, I was going to say on that, I think that's a good point. I am concerned about the scale. I haven't thought of a good way to address that. If you have an idea about how that could be addressed without blowing it up into, you know, too much to analyze in a short amount of time, I'd love to hear it. So thank you for that comment. We also have one final comment about a request for posting the stream gauging plan on our website, and it might actually be today's presentation that they're referring to.
So yes, the presentation will be posted on our website, and we'll also be posting a link to the recording of this presentation as well. It'll probably take us a little longer to get the recording up and figure out the technical aspects of that. When we do have a draft stream gauging plan, yes, that will also be posting that on our website and conducting more outreach at that point. All right, if there's nothing else, I want to thank everybody for participating today and have a great afternoon.
It looked like, sorry, does Chris Milan have a question?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I just saw it.
Chris, we're working on. There you go.
Hi. Hey. Thank you for recognizing my little hand up there at the last minute. Yeah, I'm sorry I came in on this webinar late. I'm hoping I can access it after this to hear the beginning. Do you know when the full webinar will be up and available for review?
Not positive, because we'll have to work with our IT department. From my end, this is one of the first ones that we've recorded. I know other water board meetings have been recorded and posted in different venues, but we have to figure out where we host it and stuff like that. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, and so my next question is, and that's my final question is, and you may have already answered that, so I apologize if you have, but I'm wondering if the stream gauge data is going to be available to the public in real time.
Not at this point. That is probably one of the recommendations that will come out of the report. What we have right now set up in the map gauge mapping tool is the ability for you to select a gauge and go straight to that gauge's recording site. So if it's a USGS gauge, it will take you straight to that individual USGS gauge. But it's not scraping all that information and putting it in one place. We do see the value of that, however, in the future, but this effort probably won't get us there outside of a recommendation to do so.
So what?
And I just wanted to,
from the mapping tool you talked about, it will be past data then.
It won't include the gauge data. It includes what the gauge collects, what data it collects. More of a static look at the information that gauge has available, but it will include the web link to that gauge where you can look at all the historic data.
Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted to say, if you sign up for the email subscription list, then we'll send out a notice once the presentation is posted, and so that you can get it then.
I actually got 3 more questions that just come in, so I'm glad people are excited and engaged.
So on the LYRIS list, how is it listed to sign up? Does it say stream gauge SB 19 or AB 19 or whatever? Or what does it say?
Yeah, the easiest way to sign up for the stream gauge will be to go to our website, and in the top right, there'll be a box on that website that says subscribe now.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's good. The quickest. So yeah. it's, if you go the other route, it's a little obviously more complicated, but it's under, it's nested under State Water Board water rights. And then you'll see the stream gauging plan in there.
Okay, no, I'll go straight to this website then. The stream gauging plan. Okay, yeah. All right, thank you.
A couple more questions.
See the screen, it should be up now. Sorry, it took me a little bit longer, but
yeah, there it is.
Looks like we've got a couple more questions.
We do. Here's a question that says, Brian Prestel was working on installing and updating weather and stream gauging stations for DWR. Have you contacted him to get info on the stream gauges he is working on? And are you considering SB88 web data now being pushed out to the web? SB88 is a measurement of diversions for water rights. So
and what was the name, Brian?
Brian Prestel.
Yeah, so so from DWR, I haven't reached out to him specifically, but we do have, folks from our Division of Flood Management, which I believe that's where he would be located. So we do have probably 4 representatives from different kind of groups within DFM, and we also include our state climatologist is on there too, as well, Mike Anderson. So hopefully they're making those connections. And as far as SB 88, I don't have an answer for that one.
Yeah, I can take that one. So SB 88 is basically the outfall of that is the measurement and reporting regulations with the Division of Water Rights put together, requiring different size water right holders to record their diversions at different scales depending on how much water they're diverting. Some of those are at the telemetered scale. Right now, or more of a live telemetered scale, right now, the regulations say that they can push that information to any publicly available website, the ones that do have that. We're not looking at that data that's being collected as part of this effort. I think when you look at the bigger picture of water management, that's something that we would want to start to evaluate. But this is very much focused just on the stream gauging plan for updates and information on Senate Bill 88 and that effort. We have a separate email subscription list you can sign up for and participate in that as we develop more information for that. If you're interested in the SB 88 side of the things, just send us an email and we can get you connected and signed up to that effort.
Okay, there's 2 more hands raised. Elijah?
Yeah, thanks. This is Elijah Portugal from CDFW, and I just had a question related to the planning process, and I apologize if you guys already covered this and I missed it. But essentially, I was just wondering if there was any opportunity or any thoughts going into locating new gauges in places where there's existing groundwater monitoring occurring to better be positioned to answer the question of how interconnected surface and groundwaters actually are in select basins in the state, particularly Sigma basins. So yeah, just wondering about that. Thanks.
Did you want to answer that, Todd?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're looking at from the geospatial data set standpoint, well, I guess first off, we're looking, starting the process looking for available data sets or ones that are kind of already out there. So trying to work in the groundwater dependent ecosystem data set that the Nature Conservancy developed, or indicators of groundwater dependent ecosystems. So that was looking at different types of kind of phreatophyte vegetation and other riparian things. But one of the things we've been discussing is exactly what you brought up there, Elijah. Maybe trying to figure out how to do that in the best way. And so far we haven't found any available data sets. So we've been thinking about looking at some sort of a kind of a distance threshold around streams and kind of looking at those groundwater wells that, based on that distance, it might be safe to assume that they are kind of interconnected, and then look to potentially you know, if other considerations kind of meet the prioritization, we can look to maybe cite things in that location. So still haven't found, you know, a great data set. If you know of something, we'd be, you know, happy to take a look at it, but that's something we've been thinking about possibly developing ourselves, and kind of how to characterize and locate those, co-locate those two types of gauges. So we know that data, or those data, are definitely valuable.
Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, the legislation does specifically call out, you know, as one of the additional things to consider is assistance with groundwater management. And, you know, that's kind of I think that will be somewhat of a specific outreach through the Sigma teams to kind of start to provide input on how best we can incorporate our effort with some of their ongoing efforts and needs. I don't see our effort identifying gaining and losing streams where groundwater diversions would have the impact to, you know, impact surface flows in Sigma basins. That's right now, my understanding is that's the responsibility of the Sigma Basin management. I can't think of their names all of a sudden. But we'll be coordinating at any rate with the different with water resources and our state water board Sigma teams to try to generate some of that information and see how best we can incorporate it.
Yeah, and so again, from DWR's perspective, we are internally, you know, coordinating with a Sustainable Groundwater Management office as our group of folks, but yeah.
I see one more question from Caitlin Willing.
Hi, yes, so I'm Caitlin from the Yurok Tribe Environmental Program. So I actually have 6 stations to add, and I'm wondering how you want the location shared. Do you just want GPS units, a map with points? I guess I'll email you, but just wanted to.
Yes, if you can send us an email with the GPS coordinates, that'll be good. And then any information about what data the gauges collect. And I don't know if they're hosted on a web service anywhere that's publicly available, but that would be just additional information. And one of the earlier commenters did mention that we should develop a form, so we'll work on that too to kind of, you know, make it easier to submit that information to us. But for now, if you just wouldn't mind reaching out to our email list and with the simple information, and we can go from there, that'd be great.
Sounds good.
And I see a hand up for Chris Milan. Did you have another question, Chris?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I forgot it. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. You can always email it later.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I don't see any additional questions.
Okay. So once again, thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, please send us an email and we can address them. So thank you for your time today, and look forward to continuing to work with you all.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you. If you can still hear us, thank you very much.
Yep.